Welcome to episode 16 of the International Web Effectiveness Podcast, where Bill Hunt and I, Bill Scully, focus on the strategies and techniques necessary to improve web presence and manage your global websites. In our last episode, What is International SEO, where we tackled real challenges like adapting to local search behaviors and avoiding duplicate content, penalties across regions. There was a lot of valuable nuggets in there. In this episode, we're going to dig into IP location and language detection. When I think of IP detection and language, I've seen a lot of sites do it wrong. I've seen some sites do it really well, and you have some great examples there. But basically what we're talking about is when someone comes into your site, their IP is detected, and then you can redirect them to the right page that you map to that IP address. So Bill, how you doing?
Good. Everything's good.
So this is something that you want to tackle. You want to get started?
Sure. Yeah, we covered this a little bit in the international SEO out of the PubCon presentation where people were asking about this. I've also had it recently when one of the people I was talking to, they weren't getting their Hreflang right, and they said, fine, we'll just use IP detection to route them to the correct place. And I thought it's, now's a good time to talk about this because I've seen, as you have, a lot of people get this wrong. There's still a lot of sites that don't do it. And it was interesting as I was writing an article about this, there was a few articles that sort of broadly told you how to do it. A couple, interestingly enough, were giving reasons from an SEO perspective. And then there was more than a dozen that said, don't do it. It's the spawn of Satan that, it's a bad user experience. And I think that goes back to your point about a lot of people do this wrong. And if we just circle back, it's what it's doing, as you said, when a user comes, it's either using at a browser level or at a server level. Some people do it out at a CDN level. So if you're using Akamai or Cloudflare, they'll often do it. That's where we often see problems because this is a set it and leave it thing. This is like Hreflang. A lot of people, they do it, they tick the box. We got the t-shirt, let's move on and not think about this. And so that's what's happening, right? A user comes in and let's say I'm in the United States. I try to visit a UK website. It says, this user's from the US. Now, one of two ways people do this. One, they just immediately carry me over to the UK site. And in either, if it's well architected, they'll dump me on the same page that I was on. I'd say 9 times out of 10, they dump me on the homepage of the UK. So I came in from search. In many cases, I went to the wrong page, the wrong market page, and then they jumped me over to the homepage. So that's where people get frustrated with this, is that they get sort of sent to, they have to restart their activity. A second part of this that a lot of people do is they do language detection. And language detection comes from your browser. And in my experience, most people don't even realize that. So if you're in the United States and you go download Chrome or Firefox or Microsoft, it natively sets the default to American English. If you do that in whatever other country, it sets the language to the local language. So if you download it in Germany, and especially if you came to the German site, then your language is going to be set to German or Germany German. And so that's what they're looking at, right? And you can have multiple languages as in sort of a hierarchical order. So if your native language is, say, Japanese, but you also speak English, you can have Japanese and English. And what these will do is they will look at those two things and then make a decision based on a logic table where you should go. And that's really the first mistake people make, is if they leave it to their CDN or they leave it to whatever plugin that they licensed or solution that they've licensed, how much due diligence went into that? And that's why we tell people, just like with Hreflang, you should build a country language matrix. These are all the sites that I have. Who am I trying to target with this version of my site? What language is it in? And then cross-tab that to what the system deployed for you to make sure that you have it set right. Because, some people, some systems say, okay, somebody came from the UK. We know you have a UK site, so you just toss them over there. The one that I don't see very many people dealing with is adjacent markets. So let's say you have a UK site, but maybe you don't have an Ireland site. So are people who have an English language preference that came from, where do people from Ireland go if you don't have a website? Do they go to the UK? Sometimes people will send them to a neutral site, like a /en site. Maybe if they're US centric, they might send people to the US. Typically, they would probably send them to the UK. But what about countries like Lithuania? And this is an example we've given in one of our training modules is Dimitri, my developer, found exactly what he was looking for in Google. It was the UK site. He clicked it, and they sent him to the Italian language version of their Swiss website. And we could never rationalize why they did it until we realized that IT and lowercase lt look very much the same. So because his language was Lithuanian, somebody mistyped it and sent him to, this Italy site. And this is one of the logic things you need to think out. Maybe at least send the person to an equivalent currency, right? Lithuania is on the euro. So do I send them to Switzerland, which is a Swiss franc? Do I send them to, some other market that doesn't use the euro, or where? So we need to have a thought process. Now, all of that being said, the one thing I want to talk about is some of the reasons that people need to do this, because a lot of SEOs, there's a couple reasons SEOs will tell you without any care or concern of why you do it, why you should not do this, why you should not do IP or language detection. Some will overly interpret Google's cloaking definition that when you give Google one page and you give a user another page, that they define that as cloaking. So they hide behind that to say you shouldn't do IP detection for that reason. But if you look at what Google's saying, you shouldn't give a page a different page. But the reality is you're not giving Google a different page. Google tried to fetch your German page. And Google, doesn't present a language preference. Google will not take cookies, but they will present an IP, which often is in Mountain View in California. Yeah. So we see a lot of this where they get bounced back to the United States. So you're actually doing the very bait and switch that you're telling them not to do, because Google requested the German page because they wanted to, do good by you and index your German page. And you said, nope, you're in the US, you're out of here. What's even crazier is when people don't think about this for their XML sitemaps. And I have more than a dozen examples where, Google has tried to fetch their local market sitemaps and they get bounced back to the US. They can only ingest the US sitemap. So they don't have a source of URLs. They can't crawl. They can't index. And so they want to know why all these markets aren't in Google, why we're not getting traffic, why we're not ranking, why we're not. And it's because nobody bothered, to put in an exemption in the search engines with user agents. Now, the good news is if you are using a Cloudflare Akamai solution, they're smart enough to do that. But if you're using, one from, Johnny's Plugins R Us on a WordPress build, and you downloaded a freeware version, they're definitely not going to do that. So that's one. But again, let's go back to other reasons. You've worked with a lot of regulated companies or industries, spirits, tobacco, pharma, some defense products companies have to gate their product. Like you can't even advertise alcohol in most of the Middle East. So anybody coming from those markets, you have to block them. Mm-hmm. And so, and again, there's not a negative impact on SEO because they're not supposed to see it anyways. And Google can, and why do they have a Middle East or an Arabic site if it's illegal? But we'll talk about that on another episode of how you game the dark market for things, but that's why people need it. Another one that I think everybody's aware of, but most people don't think of, is the regulatory compliance around like GDPR. If somebody comes from Europe, you need to put up the privacy statement. You need to allow them to pick the cookies that they are willing to take. And so you need to be able to accommodate those EU regulations or the California regulations. And interestingly enough, it's actually against the law to block those people. Now, if you don't operate in that market, it's no harm, no foul, and that's not legal advice. But if you are targeting those markets and you want to sell to them, you have to have this. You have to have that pop-up, that intrusive pop-up. So that's another one. And one that I find very rare that people talk about is if we get into contractual, right? Like a lot of game companies, they have market contracts with people. They gate territories. So we've seen this a lot with like Russia and China and places where companies will come in, they'll get an exclusive deal. We're seeing this more and more with brands. A private equity company buys a brand and they give exclusive rights. And because the exclusive rights to, this market to France, then anybody outside of France, it's probably not a thing. But if somebody tries to come to your US site from France, you got to send them over to France because of contractual obligations. And then we can get into, web effectiveness, which is our passion, load balancing. Hey, maybe they don't see that they're being redirected somewhere, but especially if you've got, a global site, somebody coming from France or Italy may get sent to a data center that's near them. And that's sort of where CDNs come in. And then the last one is a reason to do this is product availability and price. So you may, want so that people can only see the products in that market. There's another one I'm going to throw in that's really regulatory and compliance. We see this a lot with people on Shopify. They end up building multiple Shopify pods because they're like all the EU sites are under one pod, but legal and tax compliance, and then non-EU markets maybe in another pod, and then Latin America in another pod because that's a whole nother nightmare of regulations and regulatory compliance. So those are all reasons why people want to move people around.
And I think throw in another one, when you're marketing the domain. So if you're just putting the domain up, there's no indication as to what page you should be looking at.
Right.
So,
and so there's a lot of valid reasons
yeah,
to do this. Like, I think that's a brilliant one. If you've got a .com and there's nothing to designate the people. And, if you listen to Fabrice from Bing, and I think I mentioned in the previous podcast on international, I'm starting to sway his direction with this idea of language specific sites. And then we use modern technology to, you have a French language site now. And again, don't write in and tell us that there's a difference between French for Canada and a French for Morocco and French France. Yes, we know that. And if you can and will able to create dedicated sites, that's the right thing to do. But if you're broke and starting out and testing the market, you're probably not going to do that. But what you can do if somebody comes to your French site from Morocco, you can change your lead gen, module to where those leads go to an EMEA contact that maybe handles the rest of the region. Same thing with Canada. They can go there. And one other thing I want to talk about, this reason why, security and fraud. I mean, that's another one. Like some markets are just notorious for fraud and other suspicious activities. So using the IP, you can at least put them in a different channel. Any other reasons to do this that you can think of, Bill?
Yeah. So if you were doing a campaign and you wanted to use a campaign slug, you wouldn't have to have one for every single language and country. So, .com/campaign name could be the thing that's promoted in print.
Yeah.
Same thing with if you're setting up QR codes. But I think you've hit them all.
And so on that segue, actually in the article that we're going to post on this, there's an example in there within a market. If you go to, well, you go to Florida frequently. If you've ever been to Orlando and you search for anything in Orlando, anything entertainment or tourist, you're just hammered with local only discounts. Like if you're an Orlando resident, you can, it's cheap to get into Disney. You can get a season pass for like next to nothing. Well, I mean, it's probably a gazillion dollars. But the idea is that people in an IP within Orlando get those offers you were just talking about.
Yeah.
Whereas somebody outside of where they're not, a resident of Florida, a resident of the Orlando area, they would never see that. You would never show those offers to people because they can't interact with them. So that's a whole different thing on that. So what are some of the things people get wrong? What are the risks? We talked about a ton of benefits of why you might want to do this. What are some of the risks of not doing it right?
Well, people travel and you might not know the local language. I mean, I've seen some, like, have you ever worked on a site where every time you tried to go to a page, you were redirected back to another
Yep.
page? That's pretty bad. I can't think of any real good reason not to do it unless like Hreflang was working or was working. Now, what do you got?
No, exactly that. Number one is if you're going to do it, the biggest risk is really that frustrating the user, right? And what a lot of people get, I see a lot of people doing this right now where if I try to go to the perfect example is the holiday, right? If I'm in, let's say, if you were in Paris for the Olympics and you wanted to make an appointment for snow tires because, it's about to snow in New England and you wanted to book that. And then maybe that's not a good example. I wanted to buy snowshoes and I'm routed back to the UK or back to Paris or France, their French website. Like you said, I may not speak the language. I obviously am not going to buy it in France and have it sent to the US. And the reverse for people. A lot of people come on holiday. I've seen a lot of criticism of this of tourists in Japan. Japan just had a record year of tourists. And one of the big complaints was how they've been, they can't get out of Japan on the web because everybody sends them back to Japan. So smarter companies, what they're doing is they put up that choice.
Yeah, pop up.
Hey, we detect you're in Japan, but you wanted to go, to Land's End in the United States to buy snowshoes. So that's a good technique, giving people a way to go where they want. And this gets into one of the things we're going to, wrap up with is measuring. Like I've asked probably 20 companies if they've measured that if-then choice, right? Okay, hey, I see you're in Paris or in France. Do you want to go into the French site or do you want to continue to go to the US site? And ask what was that matrix? How many people said, no, cool, I'm going to stay and go to France. Or yes, I want to go to the US, or I don't want to stay in Japan because I don't read Japanese. I want to go to, the UK or Spanish or Spain site. I haven't found anybody that's really tracking that. And then on top of that, when you put this up, and you probably know the more technical name for this, the flow through that journey, was it a more positive experience for people versus before maybe you put in IP detection? So when I click, yeah, I want to stay here in France, did I then move through the site and potentially become a customer? Or did I abandon somewhere, meaning it wasn't quite the experience I was hoping for? Just measuring that. I think that's a big one. Am I being routed the correct place? Right.
Yeah.
So one is give me a way to get out and go to where I actually wanted to go so that US France option is good. And then the other is a little more thought, like we talked about earlier, adjacency or market relevance. And the other big one is what if my language preference is English and I'm in Germany and there's not an English language site, but I'm in Germany. So they send me to a German language site. How do I get to something that I can interact with? Again,
Yeah.
if you're on Chrome, it's probably going to pop up the translation service. But those are some of the problems.
Have you ever seen that on a mobile device? I haven't seen that.
I've not seen it on mobile, but desktop, obviously, it
Yeah,
pops up the option
right. I've seen that.
to localize it. Now, I think you can. Oh, so I know in Chrome on my Pixel phone, I can, in the browser, I can click an option, click translate, and it will translate it. It just requires me to go and do that. But yeah, that check valve. I think the other risk that I would say is not, and it goes back to our adjacent market, is where, and it's couched this as rest of the world. Where do we send them? To me, it's the equivalent of having the X default question.
Yeah.
Where do people in Fiji go? Where do people in Tonga go? Where do people in Sierra Leone go?
Hmm.
Where do we send them? Because, the internet's a big, almost country agnostic beast, and people can find you. I mean, that's the whole premise, right? I can Google something or Bing something anywhere in the world and find a solution.
Hmm.
And now we have a challenge of, can I get to that solution? So I would think that we need, and our closing recommendation is, if you haven't looked at this, you may want to, do some sort of an IP or language detection audit to do this. But I sort of want to sort of wrap up with, if this is going to be a long-term strategy, you do need to do two things. Number one, measure it. And you've been a big advocate of measuring anything and everything you can, as long as you get some actions from it. So things that we want to be looking at are, is this a good experience? Like, when people come through the gateway, or if there is no gateway, what is our bounce rate of people? Just like we look at this with our paid ads and our organic ads. And we talked about, I think a couple episodes ago, like this 87% bounce rate in Latin America, in Asia, and a big portion of that is people landing on the incorrect market site. Are things improving? Are you getting a lot of negative feedback from people that they're being routed the wrong place, or they're bouncing out? What is that user behavior once they choose, the left door or the right door? And are they still moving at an acceptable rate through the ecosystem? I think are all things that we need to think about and we need to monitor. And again, I was talking with our good friend Partha, who's an analytics genius, and asked him how many people, in his experience, how many people been really monitoring this. And he said probably in his whole career, maybe 10 people that have ever done any detailed analysis on, user behavior, user feedback, even doing a simple A/B test on, should we have a gating? Should we just arbitrarily move them to where we think they should go? So to me, that was a pretty low number for something that's really mission critical. And it's the equivalent of having, you know, your store clerk or store manager forgetting to turn around the open sign on the door of the store, or the other big one, somebody forgetting to update your hours in your Google My Business and says you're closed on Saturday when you're actually open. So yeah, I think people need to look at this more holistically.
Hey, this is Bill Scully. I just wanted to let you know that we have a free training course called Demystifying Hreflang. It includes 6 modules and is over an hour long with a quiz at the end of each module. You can find it at internationalwebmastery.com. Hope to see you there. So I want to talk about a couple other things here. So, internationalization and getting people to the right places. I'm a big fan of allowing people to see where they're at and being able to go somewhere else. I know a lot of sites will put like a drop down at the bottom in the footer. I got to tell you, I don't know that I've ever recognized that I've been in the wrong place without looking at the URL. And I just saw one site the other day that actually in the hamburger drop down at the bottom of the main menu had a flag and the selector in there. I think that was slick for people that maybe didn't recognize where they were and were in the wrong spot. What else was I thinking while you were speaking? Oh, GDPR, you're collecting IP information now. You need to get that in your privacy policy.
Yep.
Well, let me ask a question. So if you were starting from scratch, you had a site, let's assume you can get Hreflang right. How strict would your IP redirects be?
I think I would be moderate on this. I would definitely have the left door, right door pop up for people because again, I travel a lot, so I encounter that a lot. I think it would be moderate. One, we do it because if we're in any market that had a legal requirement, we would do it. So why
Mhm.
not do it right? Why not get some maximum benefit? I think anybody that's got a toe in any form in the EU, you're stuck with it. You've got to do it. So let's get it right. I would definitely, like I recommended earlier, I would start with a country language matrix, list where you're operating today, and then expand it to say, I don't know, the G20, the G50, the top 50 countries. I mean, crack open your analytics. You've made a really amazing Looker Studio plugin that will tell you where people are coming from by market. You can use something like that. And even if you don't have a market site, just at least know what's happening to those people. Where are they being sent? And if you're not an international traveler, there's actually, we need to write this up. There is a function in Chrome developer tools where you can set locations to test what happens when you
Right.
set a location. So you don't necessarily need a VPN, but if you travel frequently and you want to watch Netflix when you travel, you have a VPN. So, tune in your VPN to some of those markets, ping it and see what happens. Do it in incognito because, oh, the other thing I would do is going back to your cookie point and collecting IP, make sure when you cookie someone that they can bypass that. And I have an example from the PubCon presentation of a big company that when you accepted the cookies, they locked in your country and language preference. And actually, we talked about this in the presentation where, as I was trying to look at their German page, not only was it telling me I couldn't go there, but Cloudflare was telling me the page was not available. It was broken. It was giving me the equivalent of a 403. And then when I tried again, it was giving me the equivalent of a 503. Basically, the server's down. That was the
Wow.
message. And,
As a,
you
as
know,
a
and
fake signal.
it's a fake signal,
Wow.
right? Because the system didn't want, I think what it was, one was it was denied, was what the server was saying. Because when you look at the IP and your cookie choice, cookie setting, you're not, you can't go here, but there was no override exception. And this was even with a VPN set to Germany. So,
Hmm.
but when I went in incognito and it didn't have my cookies, then it let me go in.
Hmm.
I was fine to go in. But when I was in a cookie environment, yeah, because of the cookie, there was no page or result or error message that accommodated that, right? To let me break my cookies or let me rechange my decision. And this is what I wrote up for this company to say, and they're like, we never thought of this problem. So that's why, if you do an audit and you do a check, you can do that. Yeah, I would say,
So, so,
uh,
so let me throw a scenario out here. So I'm thinking that there's an automatic redirect for a .com or maybe even a URL that doesn't exist first.
yeah,
So at least you end up in the right location. And then you land on a page, and if your IP doesn't match your map, you ask them, "Hey, this is where you want to be?"
right.
Um, and that's the detection. So you're not automatically redirecting everybody whenever they land on a page. Obviously, you give them the option to navigate to different regions. Cookies. So how would a cookie? So what would you do with the cookie after they select?
Well, if I'm trying to go to another market, that's again back to your default rule that I would pop up a window. Do you really want to go to Germany? then give me the option to go there. And then you can even pop up the thing. Do you want to set this as your preferred location? So I think we just need to think,
Yeah.
right? We just need to walk through scenarios. Now, if you cannot sell cross market again because people do this, right? They'll turn on their VPN and then like I know EA Sports and some of the other game creators and resellers have this problem where a game might be, I don't know, I'm not a gamer, but the prices may not be right. Let's say $50 in market A, but it's $75 or 75 euro. So people, like, oh shit, I'm going to change my VPN. I'm going to go to that market and buy it, and I might have to pay a little extra in shipping. Or if it's a digital product, then I can get it. So a lot of times that's why the cookie and this extra level of prevention is there to stop those people from buying outside of their market. And so that makes sense, right? And again, the country language matrix, and let me add another name to it, the rules matrix, where in market does this, in region does this, outside of region does this, and you build those in. So like that scenario, if I came in and trying to go to your site and I'm cookied for another market, it at least asks me, do you really want to go into Germany? And you can be as specific at that as you want, and then say, do you want to update your preference? Yes or no? This is like IBM and HP. I think Lenovo all do this. If you try to go cross market with a cookie, it says, do you want to update your preference?
Hmm.
But this company is like nothing. And then it was just brute force, error message that, you've broken something. And so that tells me, and in their case, they didn't have any logic other than he's cookied for here, that's where he needs to go. And we don't want to write a bunch of custom messages. So we're going to pop up the denied, a softer 403 instead of saying denied. And then that cryptic 27-digit code from Cloudflare.
And there was no good reason to deny you, right?
There was no good reason other than, and when I asked them, why was I denied? And they're like, because your cookie preference was for the United States, because that went away. Now, it didn't cookie me when I was incognito. So there was no cookie,
Yeah.
and it didn't cookie me. It tried, it popped it up saying, do you accept it? I just said no and was able to go into Germany. Again, I had to be on the VPN. So I bypassed all their infrastructure. Then they're like, we had never considered this being a problem. And here's another thing that a lot of big companies don't realize. A lot of times they're on a network outside of their market. Have you ever encountered this where I bet it like Siemens in that, right? I had
Yeah.
somebody 3 or 4 months ago. They're like, this is what I'm seeing. I'm looking at their screen. I'm like, you're on a US IP. And
Right.
because everything's the United States, they're like, I'm sitting in Switzerland. I'm like, you're on a US IP. And they're like, I'm not using a VPN. And so we pinged their IP. And sure enough, it's the US. And it was listed as their HQ. So they were tunneled into their headquarters and then, out into the US internet.
Wow.
And they're like, I had no idea that I was being tunneled to another market. And so sometimes you're not seeing things that's like that. Um, Another thing talking about CDNs, I remember doing a couple projects in Italy where the company that set up the websites and were putting this in place didn't realize that because of the telecommunications laws in Italy, nobody had CDN representation in Italy, that it was in all adjacent countries.
Huh.
So, the nearest sort of, what is it, host, if you will, optimal host was like in Spain, or, it might have been here or there, could have been in Switzerland, but it wasn't in Italy. So they were getting a lot of funkiness with their IP detection for people in Italy. And so, what we had to do was basically say, okay, we're going to have to rethink this. And when we know somebody's in Italy, we're not going to we will route them to load balance them, but we need exceptions for some of the other things that they were doing because they originated from an Italy IP.
Okay.
So again, it's like Hreflang. It's like, getting consistent URL structures. It's like centralizing your product information. It's like, This is as equivalent of a problem for people as almost any of the other topics we've covered thus far on the podcast. But it is one of these things that does fall into that magical set it and leave it. And I'm just curious of the people listening to this, how many people don't know, what's being done. So, just to wrap up my thought, the 3 or 4 things, and we have a post that we're putting up on, the things you should consider for an audit is, verify the IP database. Do that periodically, review that with the provider. I've never found a tool, and I think I mentioned last time that I'm desperately trying not to build one where I can put a bunch of markets in and it does the IP and pings it. But, you can do a fake it till you make it with a VPN, in incognito. Really look at your redirect logic. Where are people actually being sent? Look at, what's being presented to people. And then the other big one is make sure, use Screaming Frog or any of your tool of your choice and use it on a VPN and see if when I request my XML sitemaps from another market, can I get them? And, again, like you mentioned a couple times, make sure you got your Hreflang correct so that the right page shows up from the beginning in the search results. Again, looking at the SERPs to see what's being presented. And another big one, like you said, make sure that you've added the appropriate language to your compliance and privacy statements, that if you are using this, you have to declare it, and that you've got, consent management reviews in place and allow users to opt out of that. And the last thing, another point you made, when we were looking at Hreflang effectiveness about a year and a half ago, we found about 90% of the 1,000 most global sites, most of them had removed their country, like the globe or whatever, from the top nav. About half had moved it to the bottom navigation, the footer navigation, and the other half removed it completely. So that's your point, that people had no idea how to get to another market.
Okay. Huh.
You wouldn't, because you're being IP detected. When I
Right.
reached out to a couple of these companies when we found this, we asked, and their answer to me was, well, we use IP detection. So we're confident we're sending them to where they need to go. That was the word they used, need to go, not where they want to go. So
We're confident we know where they are.
exactly. And it's interesting how many creative people and UX people despise that the country language selector. And I understand people hate the flag because using an American flag, for some other market, but English, or the British flag, or the one that's even crazier, the hybrid American UK flag to indicate English. Just don't even put a flag. Just simply put the name of the country and the language.
Or put English or put a globe.
Exactly. You just put a globe and let people get a country language selector and then let them navigate out from there. And that can be, because if somebody came to the page and they clicked that, and again, let's go back to analytics, right? What percentage of your people that you forced into a market actually went and, clicked your globe?
Yeah.
Second, how many people that you forced into a market went and clicked on the search box? Because you took them from the exact page they wanted in the search results and dumped them on the home page in the market you want them to go to, right?
Yeah.
And then what are they going to do? They're either going to hit the back button and go through the same exercise, or they're going to go to your search box, or they're going to pick the globe. So how many people, when you push them into, through door number B, actually, go to one of those two things? That's to me, a really, really good indicator that, forced movement that you're doing is not effective. And how do you adjust from that? But look at the data and figure out a way to fix it. What makes sense for users?
Yep. And I would say that the worst thing you could possibly do is redirect bots. So all of the search bots, that would kill your site. So make sure you know what you're doing. Bill and I can help with thinking out this whole strategy and testing it and maybe even implementing it if that's something that you needed. One last thing, I think I know a lot of people that I speak with, you start talking about VPNs, and you can for free get a TunnelBear account. And, it's really interesting, even just to see the different search results, take a look at what do things look like in France? They look nothing like the US. And it probably, it's possible that you might have IP redirects in place and not even know it because you're not being IP redirected because you've been going to the same site the whole time. All right, great. Well, we hope that you're finding value in these conversations and that you're enjoying the show. We'd really appreciate it if you could take a moment to rate and review the podcast in your favorite platform. We also want to hear from you. Your feedback helps motivate us and keeps making these things better and better. Follow International Web Mastery on LinkedIn, Facebook, and X. And we want to thank you for tuning in. We hope this episode gave you some actionable insights to improve your efficiency of your website and make your customers more satisfied. Be sure to join us next time as we continue exploring more strategies to increase your web effectiveness. I want to remind people of our free Facebook group where we use that as an opportunity to discuss these things, and you can ask any questions you want. You can also suggest ideas for upcoming podcasts. You can find that by searching International Web Mastery Free Group